So you're thinking about homesteading, huh? Let me guess, you've been scrolling through Instagram watching people milk goats at sunrise and churn butter while their chickens roam around looking like they stepped out of a pastoral painting. Maybe you've been watching YouTube videos of families who seem to have it all figured out, living off the land with their perfectly organized root cellars and enough preserved food to last through 3 winters. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you're wondering if you could do it too. Here's the thing though, and this is where most people get completely overwhelmed before they even start. They think they need to have everything figured out from day one. They think they need the perfect piece of land, the ideal chicken coop, a greenhouse that could feed a small village, and enough knowledge to rival their great-grandmother who actually lived this way out of necessity, not choice. But that's not how it works, and frankly, that's not how it should work either. Because here's what I've learned after years of helping people transition from their suburban lives to something more self-sufficient. The biggest mistake you can make is trying to do everything at once. It's like trying to learn to drive by immediately hopping onto the freeway during rush hour. You're going to crash, you're going to get discouraged, and you're probably going to convince yourself that this whole homesteading thing just isn't for you. The truth is, homesteading isn't about having everything perfect from the start. It's about building systems, one piece at a time, that actually work for your life, your budget, and your current situation. And yes, I said your current situation, because you don't need to wait until you have that perfect 20-acre plot in the middle of nowhere to start becoming more self-sufficient. Now, before we dive into what you actually need versus what can wait, I want to be completely honest with you about something. I've seen people spend thousands of dollars on homesteading equipment they never use, plants they can't keep alive, and animals they weren't ready to care for. I've also seen people create incredible, productive homesteads, starting with nothing more than a few seed packets and the willingness to learn from their mistakes. The difference between these two groups isn't money, it isn't land, and it isn't some special green thumb that you either have or you don't. The difference is understanding priorities. It's knowing what actually moves the needle versus what just makes you feel like you're doing something productive. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to break down homesteading into what you actually need to get started, what you can add as you grow, and what you can completely ignore until you've got the basics down solid. Because the goal isn't to create a picture-perfect homestead that looks good on social media. The goal is to create a system that actually works, that actually saves you money, and that actually makes your life better, not more complicated. And I'll tell you what, by the time we're done here, you're going to have a clear roadmap for getting started, regardless of whether you're working with a suburban backyard or a rural property. You're going to know exactly where to focus your energy and your money for the biggest impact. More importantly, you're going to understand why most people get this completely backwards and end up frustrated, overwhelmed, and convinced that homesteading isn't for them. Let's start with the foundation, because everything else we talk about is going to build on this. The first thing you need, and this might surprise you, isn't land. It isn't animals. It isn't even seeds. The first thing you need is a clear understanding of why you want to homestead in the first place. I know that sounds like some touchy-feely nonsense, but hear me out. Are you doing this because you want to save money on groceries? Are you trying to become more self-sufficient in case of emergencies? Do you want to know where your food comes from? Are you looking to create a lifestyle that's more connected to the natural world? Or maybe you're trying to teach your kids skills that schools don't teach anymore. The reason this matters is because your why is going to determine your what. If you're primarily focused on saving money, your priorities are going to be completely different from someone who's focused on emergency preparedness. If you're trying to feed a family of 6, your approach is going to be different from someone who's just trying to supplement their diet with fresh vegetables. Here's why most people get this wrong. They see homesteading as this one-size-fits-all lifestyle, like there's some universal checklist that everyone needs to follow. So they start copying what they see other people doing without thinking about whether it makes sense for their situation. They buy chickens because everyone says you need chickens, even though they live in a place where eggs are cheap and readily available. They plant a huge garden because that's what homesteaders do, even though they've never successfully grown anything before. The result? They end up with a bunch of half-finished projects, frustrated animals, and a garden that produces more stress than vegetables. They spend more money than they save, and they convince themselves that they're just not cut out for this lifestyle. But here's the thing, And this is crucial to understand. Homesteading isn't about following someone else's blueprint. It's about creating systems that work for your life, your goals, and your circumstances. And the only way to do that is to get clear on what you're actually trying to accomplish. So before you buy a single seed or research chicken breeds, sit down and really think about what you want to get out of this. Write it down. Be specific, because everything else we're going to talk about is going to flow from that foundation. Once you've got your why figured out, the next thing you need is something that most people completely overlook. You need to understand your current resources. And I'm not just talking about money, although that's obviously important. I'm talking about time, space, energy, and existing skills. Let's start with time, because this is where most people completely delude themselves. They think they're going to wake up an hour earlier every day to tend to their garden and their animals. They think they're going to spend their weekends building chicken coops and preserving food. They think they're going to transform into these incredibly productive, motivated people just because they've decided to homestead. But here's the reality check you need. If you're currently struggling to keep houseplants alive, you're probably not ready to manage a market garden. If you're already stressed about your current schedule, adding livestock to the mix is going to make things worse, not better. If you've never built anything more complicated than an IKEA bookshelf, maybe don't start with a barn. This isn't about being negative or discouraging. This is about being realistic so you can actually succeed. Because the fastest way to fail at homesteading is to take on more than you can handle and then get overwhelmed when you can't keep up. The same thing goes for space. If you're working with a small backyard, you're not going to be growing enough food to feed your family year-round, but you might be able to grow enough herbs and salad greens to make a noticeable difference in your grocery bill. If you're in an apartment, you're not going to have chickens, but you might be able to grow sprouts and microgreens that are incredibly nutritious and expensive to buy. The key is to work with what you have, not against what you don't have. And this is where most people get stuck. They focus so much on what they can't do that they never start doing what they can do. Now let's talk about money, because this is where things get really interesting. Most people think homesteading is expensive. They see the Instagram accounts with the beautiful gardens and the perfect chicken coops and the well-stocked pantries, and they assume it takes thousands of dollars to get started. But here's what those accounts don't show you. They don't show you the years of gradual building. They don't show you the mistakes and the failures and the projects that had to be redone. They don't show you the humble beginnings with seed packets and borrowed tools and makeshift solutions. The truth is, you can start homesteading with almost no money. You can grow vegetables from seeds that cost less than $1 per packet. You can compost your kitchen scraps in a simple bin made from scrap wood. You can preserve food using methods that require nothing more than salt, vinegar, and mason jars. But here's the catch, and this is important. Starting cheap requires starting small. It requires being patient. It requires being willing to learn and experiment and fail and try again. And for a lot of people, that's harder than just throwing money at the problem. So when you're thinking about your budget, don't think about how much you need to spend to create your dream homestead. Think about how much you can afford to lose while you're learning, because that's what your first year is going to be, a learning experience. Some things will work, some things won't, and some things will work better than you expected. The goal isn't to get everything right the first time. The goal is to learn what works for your situation so you can build on that foundation. And that brings us to the actual practical stuff, what you need to get started versus what can wait. Let's start with the absolute essentials, the things that you actually need to begin your homesteading journey. And I'm going to be brutally honest here. The list is shorter than you think. First, you need a way to grow food. Notice I didn't say you need land. I said you need a way to grow food. That could be a backyard garden, it could be containers on a balcony, it could be a windowsill herb garden, or it could be a small plot in a community garden. The key is starting somewhere, anywhere, and learning how to successfully grow something. Here's why this is non-negotiable. Everything else about homesteading builds on your ability to grow food. If you can't keep plants alive, you're not ready for animals that depend on you for their survival. If you can't manage a small garden, you're not ready for a large one. If you can't successfully preserve the food you grow, you're not ready to grow enough food to last through winter. So start small. Pick 3 or 4 vegetables that you actually eat and that are relatively easy to grow in your area. Focus on getting really good at growing those things. Learn what they need, when they need it, and how to tell when something's wrong. Master the basics before you start thinking about expansion. Second, you need a way to preserve food. This is where most people get completely overwhelmed because they think they need pressure canners and dehydrators and freezers and all kinds of specialized equipment. But the truth is, humans have been preserving food for thousands of years without electricity. You can start with simple methods like fermentation, which requires nothing more than vegetables, salt, and mason jars. You can dehydrate herbs and vegetables in your oven. You can make simple pickles with vinegar and spices. You can freeze things in your regular freezer if you have one. The goal isn't to become a food preservation expert overnight. The goal is to start learning how to make your harvest last longer than a few days, because there's no point in growing food if you can't preserve it when you have more than you can eat fresh. Third, you need basic tools, and I mean basic: a shovel, a hoe, a rake, a watering can or hose, and a few hand tools like a trowel and pruning shears. You don't need a tractor, you don't need a rototiller, you don't need every gadget in the gardening catalog. You need tools that will help you prepare soil, plant seeds, maintain your garden, and harvest your crops. Here's the thing about tools, and this is something that experienced homesteaders know but beginners often miss. Good tools make the work easier, but they don't make up for lack of knowledge or experience. An expensive hoe won't help you if you don't know when to use it. A fancy watering system won't help if you don't understand how much water your plants actually need. So start with basic, functional tools. Learn how to use them properly, take care of them, and upgrade gradually as you understand what would actually make your work easier. Fourth, you need a way to learn. This might sound obvious, but it's actually the most important item on this list. You need reliable sources of information that are relevant to your climate, your soil, and your growing conditions. You need to connect with other people who are doing what you want to do. You need to be willing to experiment and make mistakes and learn from them. This is where a lot of people go wrong. They think they can figure everything out from YouTube videos and blog posts, but homesteading is incredibly location specific. What works in California might not work in Minnesota. What works in sandy soil might not work in clay soil. What works for someone with unlimited time might not work for someone with a full-time job. So find local resources, connect with your county extension office, join local gardening groups, find a mentor who's successfully doing what you want to do in your area. Because the fastest way to succeed is to learn from people who've already made the mistakes you're about to make. And that's it. That's the complete list of what you actually need to get started. A way to grow food, a way to preserve food, basic tools, and a way to learn. Everything else is optional, at least in the beginning. Now I know what you're thinking. What about chickens? What about goats? What about a greenhouse? What about all the other stuff that you see on homesteading blogs and social media accounts? Here's the truth about all of that. Those things can be valuable additions to a homestead, but they're not necessary for getting started. In fact, they can be counterproductive if you're not ready for them. Let's talk about chickens, since they're probably the first thing most people think about when they hear the word homesteading. Chickens can be a great addition to a homestead, but they're not a beginner project. They require daily care, they need protection from predators, they need proper housing, and they need consistent access to food and water. More importantly, chickens are an ongoing expense, not a money-saving venture, at least not initially. You'll spend money on the coop, the feed, the bedding, the waterers, the feeders, and eventually veterinary care. Depending on where you live, it might take years before you break even on the cost of keeping chickens versus buying eggs from the store. That doesn't mean you shouldn't get chickens. It means you should get chickens because you want to know where your eggs come from, because you want the experience of caring for animals, because you want the fertilizer for your garden, or because you enjoy having them around. Don't get chickens because you think they're going to save you money right away. The same principle applies to other livestock. Goats, sheep, pigs, and cattle can all be valuable parts of a homestead, but they're advanced projects. They require knowledge, experience, proper facilities, and significant ongoing investment. They're not something you should jump into during your first year of homesteading. So when do you add these things? When you've mastered the basics, when you can successfully grow and preserve food, when you have the time, energy, and resources to properly care for animals. When you've done the research and understand what you're getting into. The same goes for infrastructure projects like greenhouses, root cellars, and outbuildings. These things can be incredibly valuable, but they're not necessary for getting started. In fact, they can be a distraction from learning the fundamental skills that everything else builds on. Here's what I recommend instead. Start with the basics. Get really good at growing and preserving food. Learn what works in your specific situation. Build your knowledge and your confidence. Then, gradually add complexity as you're ready for it. This approach has several advantages. First, it keeps your initial investment low, which means you can afford to make mistakes without going broke. Second, it prevents you from getting overwhelmed by trying to do too much at once. Third, it gives you time to figure out what you actually want from homesteading before you commit to expensive projects. Most importantly, it sets you up for long-term success, because homesteading isn't about having the most impressive setup or the most animals or the biggest garden. It's about creating a sustainable system that makes your life better, not more complicated. Now that you've laid the groundwork with your personal motivations and resource assessment, it's time to tackle the most practical question every aspiring homesteader faces. What do you actually need to get started, and what can wait until later? This is where the rubber meets the road, where dreams meet reality, and where smart planning separates successful homesteaders from those who burn out after their first season. The truth is, you don't need nearly as much as you think to begin homesteading. In fact, trying to acquire everything at once is one of the fastest ways to overwhelm yourself financially and practically. Instead, successful homesteading follows a priority system, building foundational skills and infrastructure before moving on to more complex projects. Let's start with the absolute essentials, the things you genuinely cannot homestead without. First and foremost, you need reliable access to water. Notice I didn't say you need to own a well or have pristine spring water bubbling up from your property. You need access to clean water for drinking, cooking, cleaning, and eventually for plants and animals. This might mean municipal water, a shared well, or even hauling water initially. The key is ensuring your water source is dependable and safe. Next, you need some form of shelter that protects you from the elements. Again, this doesn't mean you need to build a log cabin from scratch or install solar panels on day one. A basic structure that keeps you dry and provides security is sufficient to start. Many successful homesteaders began in mobile homes, small houses, or even converted outbuildings while they developed their land and skills. You'll also need basic tools for land management and food production. A good shovel, rake, hoe, and hand pruners will take you surprisingly far. Add a wheelbarrow or garden cart for moving materials, and you've got the foundation of a functional homestead toolkit. These tools don't need to be expensive or fancy, they just need to work reliably. Speaking of food production, you'll want to start with a small garden space. This could be as simple as a few raised beds, containers on a porch, or even a small plot of tilled ground. The goal isn't to feed your family entirely from your first garden, it's to learn how plants grow in your specific conditions and to begin developing your food production skills. Basic food preservation equipment is also essential early on. A pressure canner, dehydrator, or freezer space allows you to extend your harvest and reduce food waste. These tools pay for themselves quickly and teach you valuable skills that become increasingly important as your homestead grows. You'll need reliable transportation to get supplies, access markets, and handle emergencies. This doesn't mean you need a brand new pickup truck, but you do need something dependable that can handle the demands of rural life and occasional hauling duties. Finally, you need some form of income or financial cushion. Homesteading can reduce your expenses over time, but it requires initial investment and rarely generates significant income immediately. Having a plan for supporting yourself financially while you develop your homestead is crucial. Now let's talk about what can wait, because this list might surprise you. Livestock is probably the biggest thing new homesteaders rush into too quickly. Chickens, goats, pigs, and cattle all require significant daily commitment, proper housing, fencing, and veterinary care. More importantly, they require experience to manage properly. Starting with plants teaches you about your land, seasons, and working with natural systems before adding the complexity of animal care. Large-scale infrastructure projects can also wait. That beautiful barn, the solar power system, the pond, or the greenhouse are all wonderful additions to a homestead, but they're not necessary for getting started. In fact, building these things too early often means building them in the wrong place or the wrong way, because you haven't lived on your land long enough to understand how it works. Expensive equipment is another common early mistake. Tractors, riding mowers, tillers, and other power tools can make work easier, but they're not essential for small-scale operations. Many successful homesteaders work several acres with hand tools and simple machinery. Start small, learn what you actually need, and upgrade gradually as your operation grows. Specialty crops and niche markets can wait too. While growing gourmet mushrooms or raising heritage breed turkeys might be your long-term goal, start with basics like tomatoes, beans, and lettuce. Master the fundamentals before moving to more challenging or specialized production. The same goes for alternative energy systems. Solar panels, wind turbines, and micro hydro systems are excellent additions to a homestead, but they're significant investments that require careful planning and often permitting. Focus on reducing your energy consumption first, then consider generation systems once you understand your actual needs. Advanced food preservation techniques can also wait. While fermentation, smoking, and curing are valuable skills, start with basic canning and dehydrating. Master these simpler techniques before moving on to more complex preservation methods. Here's what you should prioritize in your first year. Get your water situation sorted out, whether that's testing your well, improving your municipal connection, or installing basic storage. Establish your shelter and make any necessary repairs or improvements for safety and comfort. Start your garden, but keep it small and manageable. A few raised beds or a small plot will teach you more than trying to cultivate acres right away. Focus on crops that are easy to grow in your area and that you actually eat regularly. Build your basic tool collection gradually, buying quality items as you need them, rather than trying to stock a complete workshop immediately. Learn to use each tool properly before adding more. Begin developing relationships with local farmers, gardeners, and homesteaders. These connections are invaluable for learning, trading, and getting help when you need it. Many experienced homesteaders are happy to share knowledge with enthusiastic beginners. Start preserving food, even if it's just freezing extra vegetables or learning basic canning techniques. These skills build on each other and become increasingly important as your production grows. In your second year, you can begin expanding your garden, adding perennial plants like fruit trees or berry bushes, and perhaps considering your first livestock. By this point, you'll have a much better understanding of your land, your climate, and your own capabilities. The key is to build systematically, with each element supporting the others. Your garden teaches you about your soil and climate while providing food to preserve. Your preservation skills reduce waste and extend your harvest. Your tool collection grows based on actual needs rather than assumptions. This approach might seem slow, but it's actually much faster than the alternative. Trying to do everything at once leads to overwhelm, mistakes, and often abandoning the whole project. Building gradually creates a solid foundation that can support larger ambitions later. Remember, homesteading is a marathon, not a sprint. The goal isn't to transform your property overnight. It's to build sustainable systems that improve your life over time. Every successful homesteader started with basics and built from there. Your journey will be unique, but the principles remain the same. Start small, learn continuously, and build on your successes. The most important thing you can do right now is start. Don't wait until you have the perfect property, the ideal setup, or all the knowledge you think you need. Start where you are, with what you have, and learn as you go. The best homesteaders are those who began before they felt ready and learned through experience rather than endless planning. Now that you understand the foundational elements of homesteading and have learned what essentials to prioritize, let's dive into the practical realm of actually getting your hands dirty. This is where the rubber meets the road, where theory transforms into tangible skills and systems. Because here's the truth nobody tells you about homesteading. Knowing what to do is only half the battle. The other half is developing the competence and confidence to actually do it well. Starting with food production, which is likely why most people are drawn to homesteading in the first place. You don't need to become a master gardener overnight, but you do need to understand the fundamentals of soil, seasons, and succession planting. Begin with understanding your soil's pH and basic composition. This isn't just gardening nerdom, it's the foundation of everything you'll grow. A simple soil test kit from your local extension office will tell you more about your land's potential than hours of wishful thinking. Choose crops that align with your climate zone and growing season. This sounds obvious, but you'd be amazed how many new homesteaders try to grow tropical fruits in Minnesota or desert plants in the Pacific Northwest. Start with reliable, productive crops that store well. Potatoes, onions, winter squash, and beans are homesteading staples for good reason. They're forgiving, nutritious, and give you plenty of food per square foot invested. Learn the art of succession planting. Instead of planting all your lettuce at once and having it bolt simultaneously, plant a small amount every 2 weeks. This gives you a continuous harvest rather than a glut followed by nothing. The same principle applies to most quick-growing crops. It's about creating steady abundance rather than overwhelming surplus. Preservation becomes crucial once you start producing real quantities of food. Canning, freezing, dehydrating, and fermentation aren't just old-timey skills. They're your bridge between seasonal abundance and year-round food security. Start with water bath canning for high-acid foods like tomatoes and fruits. It's safer for beginners and doesn't require expensive pressure canning equipment initially. Fermentation deserves special attention because it's perhaps the most overlooked preservation method among new homesteaders. Sauerkraut, kimchi, pickles, and fermented vegetables are not only shelf-stable, but actually improve in nutritional value through the fermentation process. Plus, they require no energy input beyond the initial preparation. A few glass jars and some salt can preserve hundreds of pounds of vegetables. Water management often gets overlooked until there's a problem. Understanding your water sources, usage patterns, and storage options should happen early in your homesteading journey. Even if you're on municipal water, knowing how to collect and store rainwater gives you backup options and reduces dependence on external systems. Gray water systems, where you reuse water from sinks and showers for irrigation, can significantly reduce your water footprint. These don't have to be complex engineered systems. A simple laundry-to-landscape setup can irrigate fruit trees and gardens with minimal investment. Just make sure you're using biodegradable soaps and following local regulations. Energy independence starts with conservation, not generation. Before you invest in solar panels or wind turbines, audit your energy usage ruthlessly. LED lighting, efficient appliances, and good insulation will reduce your energy needs far more cost-effectively than trying to generate your way out of wasteful consumption. When you do start generating your own power, think in terms of systems rather than individual components. A small solar setup that charges a battery bank can power LED lights, charge devices, and run small appliances. This isn't about going completely off-grid immediately, it's about building resilience and reducing dependence gradually. Heating and cooling deserve special consideration because they typically represent the largest energy expenses for most households. Wood heating can provide both independence and cost savings, but it requires planning, physical work, and proper equipment. You'll need a reliable source of seasoned firewood, proper storage, and a well-maintained stove or fireplace insert. Building skills become essential as you expand your homestead. You don't need to become a master carpenter, but basic construction knowledge saves enormous amounts of money and gives you the confidence to tackle projects as they arise. Start with simple projects like building raised beds or chicken coops before attempting major structures. Learning to work with basic tools, understanding lumber grades, and grasping fundamental construction principles will serve you throughout your homesteading journey. YouTube and local workshops can provide education, but nothing replaces hands-on practice with guidance from experienced builders. Mechanical skills prove invaluable when you're responsible for maintaining pumps, generators, tractors, and other equipment. Understanding basic engine maintenance, electrical troubleshooting, and hydraulic systems can save you thousands in repair costs and prevent minor issues from becoming major problems. Don't overlook the importance of developing relationships with neighbors and local tradespeople. Homesteading doesn't mean complete isolation. Having a network of people you can call for advice, assistance, or emergency help is crucial. These relationships often prove more valuable than any tool or technique. Record keeping might seem tedious, but it's essential for improvement and planning. Track what you plant, when you plant it, yields, weather patterns, and what works or doesn't work. This creates a personalized database of knowledge specific to your land and climate. After a few seasons, these records become invaluable for planning and troubleshooting. Financial planning for homesteading differs significantly from conventional budgeting. You'll have irregular income from seasonal sales, periodic large expenses for infrastructure, and the need to maintain emergency funds for equipment failures or natural disasters. Understanding cash flow patterns and building appropriate reserves prevents financial stress from derailing your homesteading goals. The learning never stops in homesteading. Each season brings new challenges, opportunities, and lessons. Embrace this continuous education rather than feeling overwhelmed by how much you don't know. Every expert was once a beginner, and every skill you develop builds upon the previous ones. Safety considerations become paramount when you're working with power tools, handling livestock, preserving food, and managing various homestead systems. Proper training, protective equipment, and emergency preparedness aren't optional extras. They're essential investments in your ability to continue homesteading long-term. Start building your practical skills gradually, focusing on one area at a time until you develop competence before moving to the next. This systematic approach prevents overwhelm and ensures you're building a solid foundation rather than a precarious house of cards. Remember, homesteading is a marathon, not a sprint, and the skills you develop today will serve you for decades to come. Now let's talk about the financial side of homesteading, because here's the thing. Most people don't want to hear this. Your bank account matters more than your dreams, at least initially. I know that sounds harsh, but stick with me because understanding the real costs up front will save you from heartbreak later. The brutal truth is that homesteading can be expensive or surprisingly affordable depending on how you approach it. The difference between success and failure often comes down to understanding what deserves your dollars right now versus what can wait until you've got more breathing room financially. Let's start with the essentials that actually need your money immediately. First up is your water situation. If you're not on city water, you're looking at well drilling costs that can range anywhere from $3,000 to $15,000, depending on your location and how deep they need to go. This isn't optional. You absolutely cannot homestead without reliable water access. But here's where people get it wrong. They think they need the fanciest well system from day one. You don't. A basic well with a simple pump setup will serve you perfectly while you're learning everything else. Next comes shelter, and this is where I see folks make the biggest financial mistakes. They think homesteading means building their dream farmhouse immediately. Wrong. Your first priority is safe, dry, functional shelter. That might mean a small cabin, a manufactured home, or even renovating an existing structure on the property. The Instagram-worthy farmhouse can wait until you've proven you can actually handle the homesteading lifestyle. Here's something nobody talks about enough: the hidden costs of rural living. Your internet might be more expensive and slower. Propane delivery costs more than you think. Getting materials delivered to remote properties often comes with hefty fees. Budget for these realities because they add up quickly. Now let's discuss the money traps that derail new homesteaders. Livestock is the biggest one. Everyone wants chickens, goats, and maybe a cow right away. But animals are expensive to start, expensive to feed, expensive to house, and expensive when they get sick. A single veterinary emergency can cost hundreds or thousands of dollars. If you're not prepared financially, you'll end up making difficult decisions about animal care that nobody wants to make. Equipment is another money pit. That beautiful tractor looks amazing, but it's not essential when you're starting with a small garden. A good shovel, rake, and wheelbarrow will handle most of your initial needs. You can always upgrade later when you understand what you actually need versus what looks cool in the equipment catalog. Here's my approach to homesteading finances. Start with the absolute essentials and build from there. Create 3 categories in your budget: must-haves, nice-to-haves, and dream purchases. Your must-haves include water, basic shelter, simple tools, and safety equipment. Nice-to-haves might include a greenhouse, larger garden tools, or upgraded fencing. Dream purchases are things like that tractor, fancy barn, or heritage breed livestock. The key is being honest about which category each expense falls into. That expensive chicken coop you're eyeing might feel like a must-have, but if you can build a functional coop for half the price, the fancy one is actually a nice-to-have. Let's talk about the smart money moves that experienced homesteaders use. First, buy used whenever possible. Farm equipment, tools, and even building materials can often be found secondhand for a fraction of retail price. Join local farming groups, check auction sites, and drive around rural areas looking for estate sales. You'll be amazed at what you can find. Second, learn to barter and trade. Rural communities often operate on informal exchange systems. Maybe you help your neighbor with computer problems in exchange for fresh eggs. Or you trade your woodworking skills for someone's mechanical expertise. These relationships save money and build the community connections that make homesteading sustainable. Third, think in terms of return on investment. Some expenses pay for themselves quickly. A good pressure canner might cost $200, but if you're preserving your own food instead of buying expensive organic produce, it pays for itself within a year. Solar panels have a higher upfront cost but can significantly reduce your monthly expenses over time. Here's where timing becomes crucial. Some investments make sense early on, others should wait. Food preservation equipment pays for itself immediately because you can start using it right away. But that expensive greenhouse doesn't make sense until you've mastered basic gardening and know you'll actually use it consistently. Let's discuss the seasonal aspect of homesteading expenses. Your costs will vary dramatically throughout the year. Spring might require seed purchases and equipment repairs. Summer could bring unexpected veterinary bills or equipment failures during peak growing season. Fall means harvest preservation costs and winterization expenses. Winter brings heating costs and potential emergency repairs when everything breaks in the cold. Plan for these seasonal fluctuations by setting aside money during lower cost periods. Don't spend your entire budget in spring and then scramble to cover winter heating costs. This kind of planning separates successful homesteaders from those who burn out financially. One often overlooked aspect is the opportunity cost of homesteading. The time you spend learning new skills, tending animals, and maintaining property is time you're not earning money elsewhere. This isn't necessarily bad, but it's important to factor into your financial planning. Some homesteaders supplement their income with farmers market sales, agritourism, or remote work that fits their rural lifestyle. Here's something encouraging. Many homesteading skills can actually save you significant money over time. Learning to preserve food, repair equipment, and handle basic veterinary care reduces your dependence on expensive services. But these savings take time to develop, so don't count on them immediately. The smartest financial approach is to start small and prove each aspect of your homesteading operation before expanding. Begin with a small garden before committing to acres of crops. Start with a few chickens before investing in a flock of 50. This approach lets you learn without devastating financial consequences if something doesn't work out. Remember that homesteading is a long-term lifestyle change, not a quick transformation. Your financial approach should reflect this reality. It's better to take 3 years to build a solid, sustainable operation than to exhaust your resources in year 1 and give up. The most successful homesteaders I know are those who remained financially conservative during their first few years. They resisted the urge to buy everything at once and instead focused on learning skills, building relationships, and gradually expanding their operation as their knowledge and resources grew. Your homesteading budget should include emergency funds because rural living comes with unexpected challenges. Equipment breaks, animals get sick, and weather can devastate crops. Having financial reserves means these setbacks become minor inconveniences rather than operation-ending disasters. Think of your homesteading investment as a marathon, not a sprint. The goal is to build something sustainable that enhances your life long term, not to create financial stress that defeats the purpose of pursuing a simpler, more self-sufficient lifestyle. Now that you understand the fundamental building blocks of homesteading and have learned to think strategically about what to prioritize and what to postpone, let's dive into the financial realities of this lifestyle. Because here's the truth, nobody talks about enough. Homesteading can be incredibly expensive if you approach it wrong, but surprisingly affordable if you're smart about it. The first thing you need to understand is that homesteading operates on a completely different financial timeline than most people are used to. Your typical consumer purchases give you instant gratification: buy a gadget, use it immediately, feel good about it for a week, then move on to the next thing. Homesteading investments work differently. You might spend money on fruit trees that won't produce for 3 years, or build infrastructure that seems expensive up front but saves you money for decades. This shift in thinking is crucial because it determines whether you'll succeed or burn through your savings in the first year. Let's start with the biggest financial mistake new homesteaders make: trying to do everything at once. I've seen people drop $10,000 in their first month buying chickens, goats, gardening supplies, tools, fencing, and processing equipment. 6 months later, half of it is sitting unused in their garage because they got overwhelmed, and they're questioning whether homesteading is even worth it. The problem isn't that they spent money, it's that they spent it all up front without understanding what they actually needed. Instead, think of homesteading finances like building a house. You don't start with the fancy crown molding and granite countertops. You start with the foundation, then the framing, then the basic systems, and only then do you add the finishing touches. Your homestead finances should follow the same principle: foundation first, luxuries later. So what's your financial foundation? It's the basic systems that either save you money or generate income relatively quickly. A vegetable garden is foundation because it can cut your grocery bill within months. Basic food preservation equipment like a pressure canner or dehydrator is foundation because it prevents waste and extends your harvest. Hand tools are foundation because they're versatile and don't require ongoing fuel costs. These investments pay for themselves quickly and form the base for everything else. What's not foundation? Livestock before you have proper fencing and shelter. Expensive power tools before you know what projects you'll actually tackle. Bulk buying supplies for projects you might do someday. Fancy equipment that does the same job as simpler, cheaper alternatives. These things can wait until you've established your core systems and proven they work for your situation. Here's a practical approach to homesteading finances that actually works. Start with a monthly homesteading budget, even if it's just $50. This forces you to prioritize and prevents impulse purchases. Each month, put that money toward one specific system or project. Month 1 might be soil amendments for your garden. Month 2 might be seeds and basic tools. Month 3 might be a pressure canner. This slow, steady approach might feel boring compared to the excitement of buying everything at once, but it's how you build a sustainable homestead without going broke. The beauty of this approach is that each investment starts paying dividends before you make the next one. Your garden reduces your grocery bill, which frees up money for preservation equipment. Your preservation equipment reduces food waste, which saves money you can put toward the next project. It's a virtuous cycle that builds momentum over time. Now let's talk about the hidden costs that catch people off guard. Homesteading has seasonal expenses that can hit hard if you're not prepared. Spring brings seed and plant costs. Summer might require irrigation supplies if it's dry. Fall often means processing equipment and preservation supplies. Winter can bring unexpected repair costs when equipment breaks or animals need extra feed. Plan for these seasonal swings by setting aside money throughout the year, not scrambling to find cash when the bills arrive. Here's another financial reality check. Your time has value too. I've seen people spend hours driving to multiple stores to save $5 on chicken feed, not realizing they just spent $10 worth of their time and gas, or they'll spend an entire weekend building something from scratch that they could have bought used for $20 more. There's absolutely value in learning skills and being self-sufficient, but be honest about when you're actually saving money versus when you're just telling yourself you are. Speaking of used equipment, this is where smart homesteaders really shine. The used market for homesteading equipment is incredible because many people try homesteading, realize it's not for them, and sell their barely used equipment at a fraction of retail price. I've bought $1,000 tools for $200, gotten livestock equipment for pennies on the dollar, and found materials for projects at garage sales and estate sales. The key is knowing what you need and being patient enough to wait for the right deal. But here's the trick to buying used. You need to know enough to recognize quality and spot problems. That means doing your research before you shop. Know what brands are reliable, what warning signs to look for, and what a fair price looks like. Join local homesteading groups, both online and in person. These communities are gold mines for finding good deals and avoiding bad ones. Plus, experienced homesteaders love sharing their knowledge about what's worth buying and what's a waste of money. Let's talk about the barter economy, because homesteading opens up opportunities for non-cash transactions that can stretch your budget significantly. Maybe you have excess vegetables but need help with a building project. Maybe you're good at canning but need firewood. Maybe you have time to help with someone's harvest in exchange for learning their techniques and taking home some of the produce. These exchanges build community relationships while reducing your cash outlay. The key to successful bartering is understanding what you have to offer and being clear about what you need. Keep track of your skills, your surplus production, and your available time. These are all valuable commodities in the homesteading world. Don't underestimate the value of your labor either. Many homesteaders are cash poor but time rich, while others are the opposite. Finding ways to trade time for money or money for time can benefit everyone involved. Now, here's a financial strategy that sounds counterintuitive but works amazingly well. Invest in education before equipment. A $50 book or online course can save you hundreds of dollars in mistakes. A weekend workshop can teach you skills that prevent costly do-overs. Joining a local beekeeping association might cost $30 but save you hundreds when you learn from experienced members instead of making rookie mistakes. This is especially important for livestock. The cost of the animals themselves is usually the smallest part of the equation. The real costs are housing, fencing, feed, veterinary care, and replacing animals when things go wrong. A $100 goat can easily cost you $1,000 in its first year if you don't know what you're doing. But if you invest in education first, talk to experienced goat owners, maybe even volunteer at a local farm to learn the ropes, you'll avoid most of the expensive mistakes. Let's address the elephant in the room, the startup costs. Yes, getting started with homesteading requires some upfront investment, but it doesn't have to be enormous, and it doesn't have to happen all at once. I've seen people start meaningful homesteads with budgets under $500 spread over their first year. The key is starting small, learning as you go, and reinvesting your savings and production into expanding your systems. Think of it this way: if you save just $20 a month on groceries by growing some of your own food, that's $240 a year. That money can fund your next project. If you preserve enough food to avoid buying organic vegetables in winter, you might save another few $100s. If you reduce your household waste by composting and reusing materials, there's more savings. These small amounts add up quickly and fund the expansion of your homestead. The biggest financial mistake I see is people focusing on the wrong metrics. They'll spend hours calculating the cost per egg from their chickens, including every expense down to the penny, and get discouraged when they realize they're not saving money. But they're missing the bigger picture. Those chickens aren't just producing eggs, they're producing fertilizer for the garden, pest control for the yard, entertainment and education for the family, and food security for uncertain times. The value goes far beyond the simple cost per egg calculation. This brings us to an important point about homesteading finances. Not everything has to be profitable in the traditional sense. Some projects are about food security, some are about skill building, some are about quality of life, and some are about preparing for uncertain times. As long as you're honest about your motivations and you're not spending money you can't afford, it's perfectly fine to pursue projects that don't pencil out purely on cost savings. That said, you do need to be realistic about your overall financial picture. Homesteading should improve your financial situation over time, not drain your resources. If you're consistently spending more than you're saving, you need to reassess your approach. Maybe you're trying to grow too fast, maybe you're focusing on expensive projects instead of cost-effective ones, or maybe you need to develop more skills before taking on bigger challenges. Here's a financial planning approach that works well for homesteaders. Divide your projects into 3 categories: money savers, money makers, and everything else. Money savers are things like vegetable gardens, food preservation, and energy efficiency improvements. These should be your first priority because they provide relatively quick returns. Money makers are things like selling excess produce, value-added products, or services. These can come later once you have surplus production and time. Everything else includes projects you do for other reasons, like enjoyment, skill building, or preparedness. These are fine, but they shouldn't dominate your budget. The seasonal nature of homesteading also creates opportunities for seasonal income. Maybe you sell plants in spring, produce in summer, preserved goods in fall, and crafts or services in winter. This diversification can help smooth out your income and expenses throughout the year. The key is starting small and building gradually rather than trying to launch multiple enterprises at once. Finally, let's talk about the long-term financial picture. Homesteading is a marathon, not a sprint. The biggest financial benefits often don't show up for years. That fruit tree you plant today might not produce significant harvests for 5 years, but then it produces for decades. The skills you develop learning to preserve food might not save much money the first year, but they compound over time as you get more efficient and expand your production. The infrastructure you build, the soil you improve, the systems you establish, these are all investments that pay dividends for years or even decades. This is why it's so important to think long-term and not get discouraged by short-term costs. You're not just spending money, you're investing in a different way of life that becomes more valuable and more cost-effective over time. This long-term perspective also means you need to plan for maintenance and replacement costs. That chicken coop won't last forever. Your tools will wear out. Your fencing will need repairs. Building these costs into your planning prevents surprises and helps you maintain your systems over time. The financial side of homesteading isn't just about money, it's about developing a different relationship with resources, learning to see value in things beyond their purchase price, and building systems that provide security and satisfaction that go far beyond simple cost savings. When you approach homesteading finances with patience, planning, and realistic expectations, you'll find that it's not just affordable, it's one of the best investments you can make in your future. Now that you've laid the foundation with your homesteading plan, assessed your resources, and started building those essential skills, let's talk about the one thing that will make or break your entire homesteading journey. The mindset that separates successful homesteaders from those who burn out within the first year. You see, homesteading isn't just about growing vegetables or raising chickens. It's about fundamentally rewiring how you think about time, money, failure, and success. And here's the thing that nobody talks about in those glossy homesteading magazines. The biggest challenges you'll face aren't the ones you can solve with better tools or more money. They're the mental ones. Let me be brutally honest with you. There will be days when everything goes wrong. Your chickens will escape, your tomatoes will get blight, and your water pump will break down on the hottest day of summer. Your neighbors will think you've lost your mind. Your family might not understand why you're choosing this harder path. And you'll wonder if you should have just stayed in your comfortable suburban life. This is where most people quit. They hit that first major setback, that first moment when the romantic vision of homesteading crashes into reality, and they decide it's too hard. But the homesteaders who thrive, who build something truly sustainable and fulfilling, they've learned to think differently about these challenges. First, they've embraced what I call the seasons mindset. Modern life has trained us to expect constant, linear progress. We want to plant something today and harvest it tomorrow. But homesteading operates on natural rhythms. There are seasons for planting, seasons for growing, seasons for harvesting, and seasons for rest and planning. Understanding this changes everything. When your garden fails in July, you don't see it as a personal failure. You see it as information for next year's growing season. When you can't afford that greenhouse right now, you don't see it as being stuck. You see it as being in the planning and saving season. This perspective shift eliminates so much of the frustration and impatience that kills homesteading dreams. Second, successful homesteaders have developed what I call the systems thinking approach. Instead of seeing each project as separate, they understand that everything on a homestead is connected. Your compost feeds your garden feeds your family, your kitchen scraps feed your compost. Your chickens provide eggs and meat, but they also provide fertilizer for your garden and pest control for your yard. This interconnected thinking helps you make better decisions. When you're considering whether to add rabbits to your homestead, you don't just think about the cost of feed and housing. You think about how rabbit manure can improve your soil, how rabbit tractors can help clear land, how raising your own meat connects to your food security goals. Everything serves multiple purposes, and this efficiency is what makes homesteading sustainable long-term. Third, and this is crucial, successful homesteaders have learned to measure success differently. In the conventional world, success is often measured by how much money you make or how much stuff you accumulate. But homesteading success is measured by resilience, self-sufficiency, and connection to the land. Success might look like preserving enough food to last through winter. It might be having your own eggs when there's a shortage at the store. It might be knowing exactly where your food comes from and how it was grown. It might be teaching your children skills that connect them to the natural world. These victories are often invisible to the outside world, but they're profoundly meaningful to those who experience them. The fourth mental shift is embracing the learning curve. Homesteading is a lifetime education. Every year brings new challenges, new weather patterns, new problems to solve. But instead of seeing this as overwhelming, experienced homesteaders see it as part of the adventure. They become professional problem solvers, constantly adapting and improving. This means getting comfortable with being a beginner over and over again. You might master tomato growing, then decide to try beekeeping, and suddenly you're back to square one. You might become an expert at preserving food, then add livestock and realize you have so much more to learn. This continuous learning keeps homesteading interesting and prevents stagnation. Fifth, successful homesteaders understand the importance of community even when they're trying to become more self-sufficient. This seems contradictory, but it's not. The most successful homesteaders I know are deeply connected to their local communities. They trade skills, share resources, and help each other through challenges. This community mindset also means being willing to teach and share what you've learned. When you help your neighbor learn to can vegetables, you're not just being generous. You're building a network of people with valuable skills. You're creating a community that's more resilient and self-sufficient. And you're ensuring that traditional skills don't disappear from your area. The sixth mental shift is about redefining wealth and security. In the conventional world, security comes from having money in the bank and a steady job. In homesteading, security comes from having skills, systems, and relationships that can weather various storms. Wealth isn't just about dollars, it's about having a pantry full of food you grew and preserved yourself. It's about having water sources you can rely on. It's about having neighbors you can count on. It's about having the knowledge to solve problems and meet your family's needs even when supply chains are disrupted or the economy is unstable. This doesn't mean money isn't important, it absolutely is, but it's not the only form of security and often not the most reliable one. The homesteaders who thrive have diversified their security across multiple areas: financial, food, water, energy, community, and skills. The seventh and perhaps most important mindset shift is embracing the long view. Homesteading is not a quick fix or a shortcut to an easier life. It's a long-term investment in a different way of living. The fruit trees you plant today won't produce for several years. The soil you're building will get better over time. The skills you're developing will serve you for decades. This long-term perspective helps you make better decisions. You're less likely to go into debt for expensive equipment if you understand that homesteading is a marathon, not a sprint. You're more likely to invest in quality tools and infrastructure that will last. You're more patient with setbacks because you understand they're part of a longer journey. Finally, successful homesteaders have learned to find joy in the process, not just the outcomes. Yes, it's satisfying to eat a tomato you grew yourself or to collect eggs from your own chickens, but the real joy comes from the daily rhythms of caring for plants and animals, from solving problems with your hands, from being connected to the natural world. This joy in the process is what sustains you through the hard times. When your garden gets hit by hail, you can still find satisfaction in the planting and replanting. When your chickens get sick, you can still appreciate the problem-solving challenge and the learning opportunity. When money is tight, you can still enjoy the resourcefulness and creativity that homesteading demands. The truth is, homesteading will change you. It will make you more patient, more resourceful, more connected to natural rhythms, and more aware of where your food and resources come from. It will teach you to find security in systems and skills rather than just money. It will show you that the most valuable things in life often can't be bought. But these changes don't happen overnight. They happen gradually, season by season, project by project, challenge by challenge. The key is to embrace the journey, to find teachers and mentors, to connect with others who share your values, and to remember that every expert was once a beginner. Your homesteading journey is unique to you. It will look different from anyone else's because your goals, resources, and circumstances are different. But regardless of the specific details, success will come from developing the right mindset, building systems that work for your situation, and staying committed to the long-term vision of a more self-sufficient, sustainable way of life. The seeds you plant today, both literally and figuratively, will grow into something beautiful and nourishing, but only if you tend them with patience, persistence, and the right perspective. Your homesteading journey starts not with the perfect piece of land or the ideal amount of money, but with the decision to think differently about security, success, and what it means to live well. Remember, homesteading isn't about having everything figured out from day one. It's about taking that first step with intention and building momentum over time. You don't need acres of land, thousands of dollars, or years of experience to begin. You need clarity on your why, a realistic assessment of your resources, and the courage to start small. Focus on the fundamentals first. Secure your water, stabilize your shelter, grow something edible, learn to preserve food, and invest in quality, basic tools. Everything else can wait. The fancy chicken coops, solar systems, and tractors will come when you're ready and when your systems demand them. Your homesteading journey is uniquely yours. Some will start with container gardens on apartment balconies, others with a few backyard chickens, and some with raw land and big dreams. All paths are valid when approached with patience and purpose. The most important tool you'll ever own is your willingness to learn, adapt, and persist through challenges. Embrace the seasons, think in systems, build community connections, and celebrate small victories along the way. Your homestead is waiting for you to begin. Start where you are, use what you have, and trust the process. The life you're dreaming of is built one thoughtful decision at a time.